Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Let's continue with the ESI Act, one of the most significant legislations that has been passed in the independent India. Let's start with the case, which has gotten far more reaching consequence. This case uh, on the definitions of the companies or factories or establishments which has to be covered under the act. So this act, this particular case, Kuriakose versus Employees State Insurance Corporation. This case was decided in Kerala High Court. And just to give a background of this case has gotten, why we have to understand this case is there was a Supreme Court case also that came in, and if I remember, if it is right, like the Hindu Geoban case, that's what it is called, where it was decided by the Supreme Court that an advertising agency or the advertisements, paper ads given, is part of manufacturing, and the establishment and it has to be covered as part of the ESA Act. That is, the paper advertisements has to be treated as manufacturing. That was one of the components of the case, but that's a very big case. But one of the components that came into the case is the whether the paper advertisements should be considered as manufacturing. And in the similar case, this is a particular advertising company, Kuriakose. It's an advertising company. The ESI Corporation said that the advertising agency should be covered as part of the ESI Act, and then employees working in the agency should be covered as part of the ESI. The company contended that they are not doing any manufacturing and they should not be covered. So the two things that came in was that advertisement and the ESA Corporation quoted the Hindu case, wherein they said that it's already decided by the Supreme Court that the advertising is part of the manufacturing process, and so the decision in front of the Kerala High Court was whether an advertising agency should be considered as part of manufacturing process and whether this establishment is covered, right? So the peculiarity of this, the Kuriakose, the company argued that they are not doing into any standard manufacturing, and what they quoted is what they do is mind work. It changes from customer to customer. The customer gives the idea. The idea is generated by the agency's team, which creates an idea. It is unique. It does not standard, and so they should not be they are not doing any specified manufacturing, and it is a creation of idea and that comes into and finished product. So each idea is unique and it should not be considered as manufacturing, whereas the ESI Corporation quoted the Hindu case, right? So the High Court decided that for a manufacturing to happen, there should be a standard input and a standard output. In the case of Hindu case, the advertisement, what is placed on the Hindu newspaper or magazine, it is standard for every viewers. The rate is standard. The paper rate doesn't change with the taste and passion of people. The paper or the magazine rates is common for everyone, and the advertising, what is being published there in the paper or the magazine, they are all standard. The size is standard, so it doesn't change. As if I see it, it doesn't change size, and if somebody sees it, doesn't change size. Size is standard. So then the input as well as the output both are standard. The output being the magazine price or the newspaper price, that is standard, and the input, the advertising content, what is seen there, it is standard. Whereas in this particular case, it is an agency which creates the advertisement, So they are not having any standard. So the customer gives the requirement and they do the artwork or the ideas flow in basis the requirement. So it is not standard, and Supreme Court case could not be quoted here because that is for a standard requirement of publishing of advertising, and this should be seen as an unique requirement where the idea flows from because of the unique requirement that's coming from the customer. So it should not be considered as an establishment doing a manufacturing process, and hence this establishment is not covered as part of the ESI Act. That was so. This case has gotten far-reaching in the thing on how to what are all the establishment that's covered under the Act. Now let's go into more detailed definitions, right? Important definitions. What is an appropriate government? Section 2, subsection 1 defines appropriate government as, like we saw in the last class, like any establishment that's factory run by the central government or railway administration, mines, oil field, and in all these cases, the appropriate government is the state, central government, and the other cases, it is the state government. Now, what is a dependent? Who is a dependent? Section 2, subsection 6 defines a dependent as any of the following of a deceased insured person. If the person is deceased, then the dependents are a widow, a legitimate or an adopted son, and the unmarried or legitimate daughter or adopted daughter, right? In this case of a son, the age limit is given as 25 years. Whereas in case of daughter, it is just said that it is unmarried, adopted, or legitimate daughter. And then a widowed mother, and wholly if the wholly dependent on the earnings of the person, insured person at the time of his death, a legitimate adopted son or daughter who has attained the age of 25 years, but they are infirm. So the exceptions that's given to a son is the person can be 25 years, but the person should be infirm, right? And then it also talks about a dependent widowed mother, a dependent parent, or an illegitimate son or an illegitimate daughter. And also it talks about a minor brother, minor brother, or an unmarried sister or a widowed sister if it is a minor. If it is a minor widowed sister, a minor brother, and an unmarried sister. A widowed daughter-in-law is also covered of the deceased person, a widowed daughter-in-law, a minor child of a pre-deceased son, minor son of a pre-deceased son, and a minor child of a pre-deceased daughter where no parent of the child is alive, or a parental grandparent if no parent of the insured person is alive. So these are all the dependents who are all covered, and they should be part of the dependent criteria for a deceased insured person. Then next is, what is an employment injury? So employment injury, section 2, subsection 8, you can see here, let me highlight this. Section 2, subsection 8 defines the term employment injury as a personal injury to an employee caused by an accident so the disease should be caused by an accident or an occupational disease arising out of and in due course of the employment, because the ESI Act is covered to protect the employee from the occupational hazards also, right? We saw in the first class. So a personal injury to an employee caused by an accident or an occupational hazard in the course of arising out of in the course of an employment, being an insurable employment, whether the accident occurs or the occupation or disease is contracted within or outside the country. So it need not necessary that the disease has to be contracted, or the hazards can happen only within the territorial boundaries of India. It can happen outside India also. Now, section 2, subsection 9 defines who is an employee. Who is an employee? So this is more important and has gotten again far-reaching consequence. Who is an employee? Section 2, subsection 9 defines any person employed in connection with for wages or in connection with the work of a factory or establishment to which the Act applies, right? Any person employed for an wages. So we have to see this far-reaching comments. Any person employed for wages or in connection with the work of a factory or establishment to which this Act applies. So who is directly employed by the principal employer, or any work of or incidental or preliminary to or connected to the work of factory or establishment, whether such work is done by the employee in the factory or establishment, whether such work is done by the employee in the factory or establishment or elsewhere. So what we have to see here is the the employee should be directly connected with the principal employer, and the work can happen in the factory premises or outside the factory or establishment also, but the work has to be connected directly to the work done by the principal employer, right? And if the person is employed, if the employee by through or an intermediate or immediate employer on the premises of the factory. See, we can talk about the subcontractors, right? In a factory there can be subcontractors who are all employed. So the principal employer might be the factory where they are working, but their immediate employer might be the person who has given them on, who has taken them on to their roles. For the principal employer, they will be contractors or subcontractors. So the contractor who is engaging them will be called as an immediate employer. So if the person is employed through an immediate employer on the premises of a factory or an establishment, or under the supervision of the principal employer, they need not be on the rules. The immediate employer need not be there, but they can still be under the supervision of the principal employer or his agent on work which is ordinarily part of the factory work of the factory or establishment, or which is preliminarily to carry work carried out or incidental to the purpose of the factory or establishment. So the employee can be directly employed by the principal employer, or the employee can be employed through an immediate employer on the premises of the factory, and which is covered under the act, and they can be directly under the supervision of the principal employer or by the immediate employer or by the agent, right? But they have to be directly connected with the work carried out by the factory or an establishment, again within the premises or outside the premises. Okay, whose services are, again, when in case of an immediate employer, the services of them can be contracted to a principal employer, right, by the person to whom the person whose services are lent. So they are also covered. And any person and includes any person employed for wages or any other act connected with the administration of the factory or establishment of also. So it need not be directly involved by the person who is engaged in the factory, but also the person can be in administrative roles also, right? Not so, we should not confuse like only people employed directly in the factory should be are covered. No, the people who are in the support roles like administration also are covered under this act, right? And even apprentices, so the people who are employed as apprentice also covered, unless they are covered under a separate act called Apprentices Act 1961. So if they are not covered under the Apprentices Act, then they are covered under the ESI Act. To the training to which to the extent length of the training where they are covered as apprentice. However, they are, the employees does not include any member of the Indian naval, military or air forces. They are not covered, even though the salary are less than 21,000 rupees or the amount specified by the central government. So they are not covered. And any person employed whose wage exceeds the wages as prescribed by the central government, right? So, however, there is one important point that to note here is, suppose an employee is covered by the act and they are within the limit of the wages prescribed by the central government, right? During the middle of the year, if the employee crosses the wage limit, suppose the wage prescribed by the central government is 21,000 rupees, and during the middle of the year, say the salary is changing, say from 1st October as 22,000 rupees. Is the employee covered? Yes, the employee will be still continue to be covered throughout the financial year. It doesn't affect with the any change during the middle of the year. If the salary is changed or the wage is changed during the middle of the year and they are crossing the threshold limit prescribed by the central government, they will still be covered until at the end of the period. Okay, so, and there are certain category of employees who has to be treated as employees, right, for the purpose of that. Canteen workers, we saw that people not working in factories but also the support function, right? Canteen workers are also covered, and employees who are working in showroom and sales office are also covered. Like again, so we are coming into the gamut, right? It is not people directly involved in the factory, but also those who are supporting them, like administration work, office work, sales and showroom related work, canteen workers, and workers engaged in services in a shop, in a place or an establishment or a shop, right? And it also includes the part-time employees if they are paid on daily rate basis, and also the casual workers, right? So these are all the list of employees who are all covered as part of the employees. Now let's see what is the definition of a family. Family includes section 2 subsection 11. You can see here 2 subsection 11 defines the term family. Family means any of the following relatives of an insured person: a spouse, a minor legitimate or adopted child dependent on the insured person, a minor legitimate or adopted child dependent upon the insured person, a child who is wholly dependent on the earnings of the insured person and who is receiving education till he or she attains the age of 21 years, an unmarried daughter, a child who is infirm by reason of any physical or mental abnormality or injury and is wholly dependent on the earnings of the insured person so long as the infirmity continues, right? Then dependent parents whose income from all sources does not exceed such income as may be prescribed by the central government. So basically a dependent parents. And in case of insured person is unmarried and his or her parents are not alive, a minor brother or sister wholly dependent upon the earnings of the insured person. So they are all called as family. Section 2 subsection 11 defines this, like a spouse, a minor legitimate or adopted child dependent on the insured person, and a child who is wholly dependent on the earnings of the insured person and who is receiving education till he or she attains the age of 21 years, an unmarried daughter, a child who is infirm, and dependent parents, and in case of insured person is unmarried and his or her parents are not alive, a minor brother or sister wholly dependent upon the earnings of the insured person. They are all called as family. We should not confuse between a dependent and a family, right? And now factory. This is a quite simple example, like factory is a place including the presence thereof, wherein 10 or more persons are employed or were employed on any day of the preceding 12 months and in any part of which a manufacturing process is being carried on or is ordinarily so carried on, but does not include a mine subject to the operation of the Mines Act 1952 or a railway running shed. So what it actually defines is a term factory, or it means that any premises including the presence, right, the surroundings of the factory, including administrative block, etc., what we saw. A factory is been defined as any premises including the presence thereof wherein 10 or more persons are employed or were employed on any day in the preceding 12 months. So what actually does it mean is suppose in a factory there are 10 people who are employed and they are covered under the act. Suddenly during the middle of the year, the factory reduces the headcount from 10 to 9. Is the factory still covered? Yes, the factory will still continue to be covered under the ESI Act. So where the condition is there should be 10 or more people to be working on any day of the preceding 12 months and in any part of the of which a manufacturing process is being carried out or is ordinarily carried on. But this does not include a mine subject to the operations of Mines Act 1952 or a railway running shed. Hope this is clear now, right? So we will continue in the next class on the further other definitions as well. And please go through this one more time. Please revise this and come back to me at babupriya@rediffmail.com for any queries or clarifications. Thank you friends and have a great and wonderful day.